So, when I got into the food industry, I didn't realize as to how broken the food ecosystem was. The amount of food waste that happens in this industry is shocking. I mean, I throw away food as much as the next guy, but when you watch it at the scale at which it gets thrown away, it goes further up the food value chain to the farmer. There's a lot of food that gets thrown away at farm level.
Especially smallholder farmers. So as a smallholder farmer, you would have to compete with large commercial farmers to enter the formal food system in order for your food to be sold in retailers. And then now it goes back to the thing of quality and also the capacity of what you can produce. So often enough, smallholder farmers are excluded from the formal food system in South Africa. So they would have to sell to the informal traders within their communities that are selling to the community. However, with this problem is that you cannot have a formal access to markets, then you can't really get access to funding, especially from private funders or even traditional banks, because now you don't have any contracts or take-off agreements with the informal traders. And now, so it means the informal traders and the smallholder farmers, all of them now, they don't have access to funding or to finance or any financial services. And bear in mind that 80% of the food that is being eaten in Africa comes from smallholder farmers. In South Africa, it's a different case because we have large commercial farmers that are supplying the retail markets. But still, in most communities, the food that they eat, especially the vegetables, comes from smallholder farmers. So, for example, I can give you an example. My mother also used to be a smallholder farmer. So if you have less than maybe 5 hectares and you don't have access to finance to buy equipment or even an irrigation system, so you are forced to farm using indigenous ways and also to use a rain-fed system instead of using an irrigation system. And also you're forced to sort of like use a natural or a regenerative agriculture instead of using chemicals because you cannot afford to buy the chemicals. So what's happening is that if my mother has that 5 hectares and she can only cultivate 1 hectare because she doesn't have enough money. So whatever that she gets there, it doesn't matter what is happening in terms of weather. She needs to, because she's surviving using that little plot that she has, also as a source of income. So it means that she needs to keep on farming until her end of time. So she doesn't have any liberty in terms of retirement. She needs, because the land feeds her. But again, because she doesn't have any land rights, she cannot go to the bank to ask for, because she doesn't have any collateral. So we figured that the entire informal value chain does not have any support in terms of financial backing, in terms of access to financial services, whether it's insurance or any other products that will help the farmer to be able to break away from poverty using the land that they occupy. So for example, in terms of crop insurance in South Africa currently is very expensive for somebody who's cultivating less than 5 hectares. So how do you solve the problem? So what we do as farmers assistant, we try to connect different stakeholders within the entire value chain. So we bring the financial institutions and also bring the farmer organizations, we bring the farmers, we bring government so that we can have a dialogue, but mostly also to just connect and educate each other and understand, because when you go to the banks and you tell them that smallholder farmers need access to finance, they'll always tell you that they don't have line of sight in terms of what is happening in their market. So the risk is too high, therefore the transactional cost to fund smallholder farmers are high. So what we do, we educate both sides and then we empower both sides through our programs, but most importantly, we use the data that we collect to create new products, so that products that are suitable and are inclusive towards smallholder farmers and also informal traders that are selling food. So I have a simple platform, which is a chat platform where we educate smallholder farmers, financial literacy, and also educate them in terms of the opportunities that are out there for them to access funding, and also using the same platform to collect data that we can use then to create products with in partnership with financial service providers. Because I'm of a view that the system is very fragmented, and because it's fragmented, everyone is designing their own solutions in silos. And if we can come together and try and create solutions and share data, because I've always have trouble with in terms of accessing data. You find that some stakeholders are not willing to share the data. So if we can probably have an open source platform where we can be able to share data, to share experiences, so that we don't duplicate solutions, but rather we partner, we collaborate, so that we can be able to help as many farmers as possible, but also to ensure that there's food security in our communities. Because we know that smallholder farmers are playing a huge role. What we have seen during the first 21 days of lockdown in South Africa was that when they shut down the informal traders, they were no longer trading. What happened is that a whole lot of people now were going to bed hungry because they couldn't afford to buy food in the retailers. And again, the smallholder farmers lost a lot of money. Their stock was rotting because they couldn't sell in any other markets. So we currently have 15,000 farmers in South Africa, smallholder farmers that are using our chatbot for information, to get connected with financial products that are out there, and
to change the competition environment and to get ahead in that way. It also tells us that the world is made by all the small actions that all of us create all the time. So therefore, the world is created by iterative actions, and all the small things and small farmers and everyone need to understand their path and their participation in bigger change as necessarily always small things. That's why I always say, first, be the change that you want to be. But if I have to give you important advice on systemic change in the food system, the first, I want to just make it simple and just say, systemic change will happen if we have many changes at many places all at once. So this means that if you are in the business or trying to make systemic change, you can never do it alone. You will always have to do it with other people. And therefore, it is important to think of this as a social movement and how different people can cooperate to make systemic change. And these people cannot all be the same. They have to be different because we need change in many places in the system. So we've got to understand that systemic change will be a mobilization of actors across the spectrum, different than we have been used to. For instance, in order to change gender relations, you might also have to involve men. So it means that you have to engage with those who are other than us. And that is really important. It also means that we will not make the systemic change with just one idea. One idea has to connect to many other ideas. So sustainable agriculture has to connect to, say, also gender empowerment. It has to connect to historical issues, colonialism, apartheid, racism. All of those things have to connect to make that one idea the leading edge of the change. So that's quite important. And it means you kind of have to speak like an angel, but hold hands with the devil. Because systemic change is change across the system, and it is quite complicated. So what I also want to say is how, when you hold hands with the devil, how can we protect the real goodness that we want to achieve? We have to understand that any systemic change, in the first instance, I would say, has to be affirmative. We have to address issues of historical injustice and social injustice, colonialism, apartheid, capitalism, environmental destruction, gender inequality, the treatment of foreigners or anyone who's different. Those kind of issues have to be addressed in systemic change. We have to be very, very aware, if you're in doing this, that the change you might be making might be reinforcing the current status quo. This means also that systemic change has to be innovative. So you have to really be creative. You have to think things differently. For instance, the position of small farmers in the food economy needs to be looked at the position of all farmers. And farmers get 17% only of the final price. Sometimes they get 1% of the final price. So if that is not changed, then you will never empower small farmers. And the only way you can get small farmers to get more money in the value chain is if they start cutting out the middlemen and breaking down the historically created value chain. That value chain does not have to be like that. And if we think about colonialism, apartheid, gender discrimination, all those things, and it is a product of that. So we have to be innovative and affirmative. It means we have to be critical. So you have to actually also really understand the position in the world that you occupy and why are you and I can use that for change. Others also need to understand what is the bigger processes that keeps us there, and systemic change is comprehending these so that we can actually change those processes. So how will you protect the values that we really want to uphold? The one thing you can do is to make the systemic change visible to everyone. Make it democratic. Put it in the public sphere. Use social media that you're doing this. In this way, then you can also let others know what is happening, and then those who are changing things back to the status quo will be exposed in how they do that. This is really, really important for agriculture. Agriculture it comes on the back of colonialism, the Green Revolution, capital-intensive farming, and we really need to transform this, not only to save the ecosystem, but also to give people proper livelihoods out of this. So we need to be really creative, and there is no way we will know now what will be the end product that can make this change. But we have to iterate it, we have to practice, we have to get engaged, and it is farmers that have to experiment and think outside the system. And the biggest resource we have to make systemic change in agriculture is to use biological, regenerative, and syntropic or regenerative agricultural systems. Because this is the agricultural productivity we've lost in the Green Revolution. And this is why the world is unsustainable. Not only do we lose the productivity of nature, we are not operationalizing it, and we are removing nature.
I wanted to speak more around that within the community that we find ourselves in here at the SI, and this is now farm worker communities within mainly the wine industry. And I think Dr. Malan has provided all the background, so I'm not going to to premise anything. It's just to also highlight that our food system is fragile and unequal because of apartheid, because of our previous colonial history, and also as the perpetuation of large-scale corporate food systems that's been conglomerated through the years, and I think through mainly the Green Revolution, as he's mentioned. And the people who bear the brunt of this inequality, who are most affected, are vulnerable and marginalized communities. And this is where I'm very passionate about in terms of helping. And so I just wanted to give a brief background on the inequality that we face in South Africa. And I mean, this is now pre-COVID figures, we've had over 30% unemployment, and much higher within our own youth, which I think is closer to 50%. And of those who are unemployed, or the people who are poor, we have close to 50% who are living below the upper bound of our poverty line. I think that is rather ridiculous. And on top of all of that, obviously we'll have high food insecurity because we do not have income security. And then so we have over 20% of households in South Africa who go to bed not knowing if they are able to actually going to get a meal the next day. And food insecurity, particularly in South Africa, affects children, where 27% of our children are affected by stunting. So it's, we have different forms of malnutrition. So 27% are affected by stunting. And then we have 13% of children under the age of 5 and 26% of young people or teenagers who are overweight. And many times we find the different forms of malnutrition existing within the same household. And so these factors are true for the LYNEDOCH Valley, and the LYNEDOCH Valley is the community that the SI is situated in. It's a small community within Stellenbosch, and it's basically made up of approximately 200 households, and most of which are farm worker households. So these are generations of farm workers that have worked within the wine industry. With a lot of the households, they still face the high unemployment and food insecurity, and about 50% of families earn less than 5,000 rands a month. And on top of that, this historical inequality of the wine industry, I mean, there's been quite a lot of traumatic history that's come through the wine industry, particularly fetal alcohol syndrome, and we deal with families that struggle with that still, and this has also created a community of a lot of families and family members dependent on substances. And so with that, the Sustainability Institute sought to see how then it would be possible to see how we transform the lives of our small community. And so with that, they believe that transformation in any system starts with children. And then so the SI provides holistic, high quality education to children and youth of the LYNEDOCH area. And they've been doing this for, just over 20 years now. And so they they believe that every child deserves quality education, and they deserve to be in a safe and nurturing space where they can continue receiving the quality education. And with that, we also have different systems of programs that actually help with supporting this holistic approach. And so this is where we come in, or where I come in terms of supporting the regenerative food systems. And then so we have various food programs. And then so with continuing to support holistic food systems, we also believe that they also need we need to also incorporate healthy and nutritious, access to, healthy and nutritious vegetables that they have access to on a daily basis. And then seeing how we further that by also incorporating food education, food, nutrition, and nutritional education into their curriculum. So we have about 240 children that actually attend different SI programs. And we have, so this is starting from our preschool, which is the LYNEDOCH Children's House, where we have 0 years to 3, 3 to 6. And then we have 2 primary schools. We have a Spark school, and then we have a small school, which is a Montessori school. And then we have an after school youth care program as well. And beyond this, the SI also has university programs. We're collaborating with the Stellenbosch University, and we offer programs in sustainable development and planning from undergraduate all the way to PhD. And then so with that, I think just speaking back to incorporating food systems and food education into the curriculum has been of importance. So what we do is we make sure that our kids and our children and youth understand the journey of food from seed to plate. And in order to also solidify this, all the food that we grow, either on the garden or on the farm, actually goes into the feeding program that we have at the SI, and that goes to two meals that are provided to the children on a daily basis. Yes, so this, I think, yeah, on this slide, we just see that we also encourage volunteerism and also learning by doing quite a lot with our youth and children. And so this really helps with trying to have them gain an experience with the food system that's very different to how they've grown up in their households, where the history and the trauma of working on farms and their relationship with agriculture has been quite negative. So we find that really incorporating and reintroducing our children and youth into the food system and kind of providing them a new story that they can actually live through also gives them the opportunity to reestablish their connection with food, with farming, and with the land. So I think one of the big things is that we had been growing food mainly for the support of the feeding program and the children, but we've had a huge impact since COVID, where obviously at the beginning of COVID, we had quite a lot of schools that were, we had all the schools closed. And so this perpetuated and increased food insecurity at a household level. And in order to change and continue seeing how we can try and reduce food insecurity, we realized that we also needed now to work with the different households within our community and then a little bit outside of our boundary. And because most of the children from LYNEDOCH depended on the meals that we provide on a daily basis that they were no longer receiving. And then so we basically collaborated with Spear Wine Farm and the Living Soils Farm, which is also it's supported by the likes of Woolworths as well. And made sure that all the food that we generate also went to the different households on a weekly basis. And we continued this for about a period of a year and only stopped now in February. So that's about 2 months ago. Because we realized that we needed to move from food relief to, really building food security and food empowerment. And then so with that, we realized that we needed to focus on seeing what the issues are. So now with the schools reopened, there is a little bit of pressure release where the children are, they're food secure because they receive food at school. But then we also had the resulting, we still had the high unemployment, which became much higher after COVID, and a lot of families and adults within communities being unemployed. And so we prioritized seeing how we can, hire, apologies, seeing how we can provide employment opportunities for adults and youth within the LYNEDOCH community. And then so we have about 14 members of the community working on with us on the LYNEDOCH farm. And then we have 4 youth who are working with us at the SI garden in the forms of internships. Additionally, we also use this as a platform of uplifting and training young farmers from the greater Cape Winelands area, particularly in farming, using regenerative principles and methodologies. And so we've had, I think in the past 2 years, we've had various young people, predominantly Black, from the likes of Kayamandi and Mbekweni communities within the Paarl and Stellenbosch areas work and train and learn with us, particularly experiential and practical experience, because we thought that that was also very important for them to have that hands-on experience, so that they actually know how to go out there and start farming on their own, or work within farming with a really good foundation. And then so now with all these programs, we thought that, and I think this was really touched well by the previous speakers, is that we do not want to work in isolation, and our best bet in really building up is collaboration. So we're working with various food systems collaborators within Stellenbosch to really understand and map out the food flows of Stellenbosch, because we realize that there's quite a lot of challenges and barriers that historically and currently that really affect our communities. And so we're wanting to identify all our food actors, looking at those barriers of access to food, to land, and also to entry or accessible foods within our food system. So that is very exciting. And yeah, just lastly, in order to create an inclusive and accessible food system, particularly in rural or peri-urban communities like here in LYNEDOCH, we have to acknowledge and confront our deep historic roots, and also acknowledge that it is fragile. And then we have to commit to dignified community engagement by building agency and empowerment. We have to value partnerships, and lastly, believe in our children and youth, because they are the ones who are going to carry on the legacy of dismantling our food system. So thank you.
This is a picture of that follows us around the world as Africans. This is the face of Africa, a hungry child. And this made me so angry, because we're naturally endowed for agricultural excellence. And across the continent, there's no reason why we should have the high rates of malnutrition, be net importers of food, have high rates of hunger, and continue to deal with the challenges that we deal with on this continent. So through a number of initiatives I've started over the last 20 years, Leap Africa, which works with young people across 6 African countries, Sahel Consulting, which transformed the agriculture and food sector through a range of projects focused on catalytic ecosystem interventions. Ace Foods, which is an agro-processing company I co-founded with my husband 11 years ago. We produce spices and complementary food that addresses malnutrition, and we're focused on displacing imports and addressing the malnutrition challenges in our country and across Africa. And most recently, through Nourishing Africa, which is a platform that we've created to support over 1 million entrepreneurs in the African agricultural landscape and enable them to scale by providing them with support, jobs, knowledge, funding, data, and some of my team members on this platform. Nourishing Africa currently has entrepreneurs in over 32 African countries, many in South Africa, and over 1,000 members. Through this work, I've recognized how important SMEs are to the food ecosystem, not just in Nigeria and West Africa, but even in South Africa and across Africa, across the world. But in Africa, over 80% of the food we consume are produced by SMEs, not the large multinationals, as many of us often think, but SMEs. They're the drivers of innovation, growth, and employment. They have strong ties to the grassroots, they are nimble, and they can pivot quickly. However, they face many, many challenges, and some of them have been shared by previous speakers: lack of affordable and patient capital, difficulty finding and retaining talent, branding, marketing challenges, inefficient business models, poor support networks, unfavorable policies, and poor linkages to markets. So I spent the last 2 years working on a book, which was just released in March, called Food Entrepreneurs in Africa, Scaling Resilient Agriculture Businesses. And for this book, I interviewed quite a few entrepreneurs in South Africa, as well as across Africa, over 80 entrepreneurs who are scaling and who are making it work in this food ecosystem. And the first key message for you today is that it is possible to transform our food ecosystem, but there are 6 prerequisites for any organization that will scale. And I know that was an implicit question that you asked our previous speaker about scaling, about replication. There are 6 components for any business model, including hers, to scale. The first is that our business models have to be demand-driven with measurable value addition. And this is often something we take for granted because so many of our models are supply driven. They're either government led, they're funder led, they're donor led, but our citizens are not willing to pay for them because they don't see the value. Our farmers are not willing to invest in them because they can't really understand how it's going to change their lives. So if your business model is not demand driven, it's not scalable. Secondly, it has to leverage technology, data, and innovation. This enables us to leapfrog. And there's so much we can do with data and innovation and technology today. Seeds, new technology, mechanization, so much that we can do with data. The third is that we have to shape our ecosystem. And I know a lot of other previous speakers have talked about it, the importance of policy that's enabling, that's supportive, that meets the needs of SMEs and the needs of people. The fourth is that our business models have to be cost efficient, dynamic, with clear systems and structures. The fifth, which is really important, is that we have to have simple, compelling branding. We have to be able to amplify our voices and tell our stories and amplify them loud enough that they're well respected and visible. And finally, we have to adapt to climate change. Our business models have to be resilient. COVID-19 was one shock, but there are going to be many more shocks. How resilient and agile are we? And how do we mitigate shocks and risks through our ecosystem? And through the business models and our commitments to addressing many components of these 6 critical components, we learn so much. Because COVID-19 has brought on new challenges and has made it even tougher for SMEs to access information, knowledge tools, financing, and support. And I'll just give you one example of an ecosystem intervention that we're piloting that captures all of these components and takes an entire ecosystem approach. And it's called the Advancing Local Dairy Development in Nigeria project. Nigeria has the 4th largest cattle herd in Africa, and yet we're net importers of milk. And we realized that there was a challenge with our ecosystem. And so we designed a project with funding from the Gates Foundation, focused on helping SMEs to scale locally. And in designing this project, we developed these 6 components, putting the farmers into clusters, ensuring infrastructure development, which is critical. And many speakers have talked about this, not just in urban areas, but in rural areas, ensuring productivity improvements for our smallholder dairy farmers, ensuring financial inclusion and income support, providing training, extension, advocacy, and behavioral change, and then investing in policy. So at the national level, we set up a national advisory council at each of our state levels, and in South Africa, there are districts or regions. We also have a cross-sector. We have people in finance from government agencies, ICT, gender, climate, water resources, security, and all of them serve as owners and champions for this to work. And we're developing a national dairy policy, and we're supporting the National Dairy Association, and we're incubating them in our office. So these are examples that you can't just come in a silo and try to solve a problem. All actors on deck. We need actors from starting with our families, our communities, the private sector, development sector, state governments, and federal governments. Collaboration is key. We cannot unlock the potential of our food ecosystems without collaborating across the board. And I want to end with a few recommendations from a lot of the work I've done, because I was asked to speak for 10 minutes and I know the time is fast. Through the work I've done across Africa, we realized that government has a critical role to play, not only in adapting and mitigating the effects of shocks and stresses, but also in creating an enabling environment by building robust and credible data systems, early warning systems. The type of shocks that we faced in South Africa during the COVID lockdowns should never happen again, right? And that's because we didn't prepare for how to help the most vulnerable. Developing, implementing, and monitoring climate smart policies, engaging in decisive action to address insecurity, because insecurity affects the food ecosystem, providing an enabling policy environment to de-risk financing, investing in systems and structures and safety nets, and revamping our extension support systems. We also need the private sector, NGOs, and development partners to work seamlessly across the board to ensure equity, to ensure support, and to ensure transformation. And I want to dwell a little bit on equity, especially around financing for agriculture and SMEs, because what we're realizing is that even in our African context, we continue to face an inequitable financial mechanism. And the dynamics of South Africa are quite unique. But what we're finding in a country like Kenya is that out of 10 startups that got funding, 8 were foreigners, Americans and Europeans, getting funding earmarked for Kenyans in Kenya. The same applies across Africa. And what I am pushing for every development partner is that if you're going to fund SMEs, make sure that you're funding locals. Make sure that the boards are diverse with people of color and locals, and ensure that through every ecosystem, we're supporting equity, we're supporting transparency, and we're supporting accountability, and we're measuring progress, because if it's not measured, it doesn't matter. Finally, I want to end with a sense of urgency. A lot of speakers have spoken on many challenges that we face, not only in South Africa, but across Africa. And the WFP says it's a toxic combination of conflict, economic decline, climate extremes, and COVID-19 that has driven millions further into the emergency phase of food insecurity. And when you look at the numbers, Africans are at the risk of severe food insecurity. And yet, we're naturally endowed for agricultural excellence. We need to ensure that food, especially nutritious food, is available and affordable. And we need all actors working together, because there's the nexus of food security and peace. Where there's food security, there's peace. Where there's insecurity, it affects the food ecosystem. And then there's a nexus of nutrition being critical to that transformation. And I'll end with my final slide. And this is my current mantra. It's a Tibetan proverb that if I tell you my dream, you might forget it. If I act on my dream, perhaps you'll remember it. But if I involve you, it becomes your dream too. We are only going to address the food systems challenges in South Africa and across Africa if we involve each other in this dream. And what is my dream? And this is Nourishing Africa's dream, a flourishing, sustainable, and just food ecosystem, which leverages agtech and digital innovations driven by Africa's vibrant entrepreneurs to ensure that the continent can nourish itself and become a net exporter of food by 2050. Finally, this is the picture of Africa that I want you to remember: a well-nourished child who lives a full and meaningful life. Not the child hungry, but a child that has a beautiful smile, big brown eyes, and can grow up in a safe and sustainable environment to live out the greatest potential. And I look forward to all of you joining us to achieve this dream. Thank you very much.